Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony, and very much appreciate the different issues you're focusing on. I wanted to kind of take an earlier focus at when you were talking about the debt and the deficit, and touch on a related topic with regard to our national security that I don't think often kind of gets tied into national security, and that's the strength of our economy just in general. So the last 10 years, we've had a lost decade of economic growth. Haven't hit 3% GDP growth, which isn't even that great for America. Our traditional rates of growth have been closer to 4 for the last 200 years. Haven't hit 3% GDP growth in almost 15 years, not 1 year of it. What can you just tell us from your perspective? Obviously, that would help on the deficit, on the debt, but just as a symbol of American power. You know, in the Reagan years, we were growing at 5.5%, even 6%. Same with the Clinton years. Can you explain just how that helps us in terms of getting our national security objectives, not just our economic objectives, the attractiveness of a robust American economy, which, to be honest, we haven't had in well over a decade? I'll offer that to anyone.
Senator, well, I'd say two things. So first is, you know, like Dr. Korb, I'm not a fan of pegging defense to GDP, but certainly the more your economy is growing, the more affordable defense becomes. The more your economy is growing, the more vibrant it is. Also, the more innovations that economy is producing.
But doesn't it also give us power to get things done that we
Sure.
want when we're strong economically, particularly in Asia?
It gives, and it also, I think, gives confidence. You know, it gives the American people confidence in the United States and our international role, and it also gives our allies and our friends confidence in the United States as well. Conversely, I would say part of the questioning that we've had of America's international role has domestic roots, because people don't feel confident in our economy at home.
Senator, I think it's very important you mentioned the 90s. At the end of the decade of the 90s, the Republican Congress and President Clinton had come up with a budget plan that not only balanced the budget, but gave us a surplus and predicted that in the first decade of this century, the debt would be wiped out.
Yeah.
And then we had the attacks of 9/11, the wars, as I mentioned earlier, we didn't raise taxes to pay for. We ran up a big deficit. Then, of course, you had the economic collapse because of some decisions that were made in the 90s in terms of some of the regulation of the banks. And that's what we're recovering from right now. But you're quite right, and go back, I mentioned about President Eisenhower said, you know, it's a robust economy that's going to enable us to eventually undermine the Soviet Union. We're not going to end up fighting them on the battlefield. And so it is important to keep in mind that it's very hard to be strong abroad if you're not strong at home. It does, if you have a larger GDP, it allows you to do things. But there are problems that you know better than I do in terms of dealing with things like the age for Social Security. When I worked for President Reagan, we were able to move it up a couple of years. Maybe we ought to think about doing that again for example, for certain people, or raising the amount that you pay Social Security taxes on. That would help that. So there are a lot of things that I think that the Congress, working with the new administration, can do to get our economy, back up again. I happen to believe is free trade. I think if the TPP and a lot of these others, the North American free, that was the way to go. We shouldn't be backing off from those.
Let me ask just one other question on another element of strengthening our national security, and that's our allies. And as you all know, and you've testified, we're an ally-rich nation. Most of our adversaries are potential adversaries, whether it's Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, are ally poor. Fortunately, I think a number of the Trump administration's cabinet officials, certainly General Mattis, during his confirmation hearing, testified about the importance of allies. I think Rex Tillerson has. The President, in his inauguration address, talked about deepening our traditional allies. Can you just talk briefly about just how important that is? Because I think there's some of our allies who are questioning our commitment, but to Americans, how important that is to strengthening our national security, and what a great strategic advantage it is that we have these allies all around the world. And again, most of our adversaries don't have any.
I would say the more allies you have, the more legitimacy you have in taking actions, the more access you have to regions, the expanded amplifying capability set that you have, where the U.S. can bring some capabilities to bear. Allies might have things that are more uniquely positioned in a given region. It allows you to shape an environment economically, diplomatically, not only at the international level like UN, et cetera, but even regionally in these regional consortiums of sorts of agreements, in trade and access to resources, the movement of people. You would much rather have more friends on your team than lacking friends, and I think the American people appreciate that. I think that money spent in ways that go to other countries are often criticized, but it's such a very small percentage of the budget, and we reap such great benefits, pennies on the dollar, so to speak, that this alliance structure should not only be appreciated but matured and expanded over time.
Yeah, I think if we start with the premise of your first question, just thinking about economic weight. I mean, our allies are not, it's not just numbers, but these are some of the biggest economies in the world. They add to our economic weight. We have allies because we have common interests. And we have allies because we share common values. And I think it's worthwhile to keep both of those in mind. And where we have common interests and where we have common values, we have very deep alliances that are not only additive, but I think in many cases also multiplicative of American power.
I thank the witnesses, and it's been very helpful.